Welcome to Intersect, a podcast where we find connection in each other's story. Today, I'm with a hero of mine. His name is Carl Wilkens. Now, he's smiling and giggling like, oh, hero, I just kind of did what anybody would do that's beyond themselves when they're in a place of chaos and horror. And it reminds me of my wife when she was working for the Desmond Doss Foundation, and they had these little video clips of soldiers that had done remarkable things in challenging times. And it was just like, we only did what anybody would do. And they weren't like looking to draw attention to themselves. Have you ever felt like that, Carl?
Oh yeah. You know, when my wife and I made the decision, we thought it was going to be a tough 2 weeks, but we're going to make it through these 2 weeks, and never imagined what of course lay ahead for us in the first place, but then all the impact it would have on our lives. I've been traveling to schools for 19 years. I never would have dreamed something like that would have come out of this choice that she and I made.
And in case you, the listener, are not familiar with Carl Wilkens, I became aware of him because of a book called I'm Not Leaving that chronicles his experience being one of two Americans, and it chronicles his experience. But there was one other American. It was a Catholic nun, correct? Remind me of her name.
It kind of was flying under the radar in a remote location in Rwanda that I don't think the embassy even knew much about her.
Okay, yeah. So, but for Carl, you were directing ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency for Rwanda at the time. Young, 30-something, I would guess at the time,
yeah, 36
maybe.
years old, wife,
young
and our
family.
Kids at the time were like 10, 7, and 5.
Okay, and so we want to really delve into, and we're probably going to do 2 segments today, but where would you like to start, Carl? We can kind of see what you're doing today, or we could kind of start from the beginning. And do you have a preference?
Well, I'll tell you, I'd love to start with Rwanda's beauty and with the courage of the people. It's got this horrible reputation of genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And I start first often just pausing and recognizing the unimaginable loss that we experienced on our planet when more than 1 million people were killed, largely by their neighbors. And then, though, I do like to just help people see what a different place Rwanda is today. Actually, 30 years later, this April, it'll be just 30 years ago that this horrible thing called the genocide against the Tutsi happened. And, some people today, they know about Rwanda from coffee and Starbucks, and other people, they learn about Rwanda from how it's among the top, some say 5 top 10 countries in the world with gender equality, or with, the first high-tech smartphone factory on the continent. There's all kinds of economic progress. But what gets me most excited is how they've put the pieces back together after this horrible 100 days of unimaginable slaughter, a genocide that could have been prevented.
And I was referring back to I'm Not Leaving this week, and particularly I was taken back to the section of Angelique, who was kind of assisting you in some of the relief efforts, but unbeknownst to you, you would find out later in the book that she was also kind of a top-level leader that was gathering a list of people and working with the Interhamwe. Did I say that right?
Right.
And there was a section in there where you're talking about that, and it wasn't with Angelique, but it was another person that was a high-level person going to them, and you expressed treating them with respect and relating to them with the expectation that they would do the right thing, even though they were involved in these horrific acts. And it's almost like they're embedded in the horror of it all, were the seeds of the work that God has brought you and others to today.
Yeah, there's so many parts to this story that just really defy logic, and
Mm,
because our brain tries to make sense out of stuff,
mm-hmm,
and when you see this story, some things do make sense, but a lot of things are like, whoa, never saw that coming. I wouldn't have
mm,
ever imagined that you would find an ally among the organizers of the genocide.
mm-hmm,
Fortunately, we had been in the country for 4 years before this horrible time. Like you mentioned with
mm,
ADRA, we were building schools and operating clinics and things. And we had a 3-year war that started just 6 months after we got there. And
mm,
we were, before the genocide, there was this gap between the war, and we thought we were on the cusp of peace, and we were working towards
mm,
lasting peace. But a small
mm,
group of extremists were planning a coup and then a genocide. And
mm,
and so this idea, when you're in the middle of chaos like this, or the killing and stuff, you're always looking for allies, and you often think they're
mm,
going to be people who are like you, people who share
mm-hmm.
your common goals or values or
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
But in this case, no, we found some very powerful allies among people who are now in prison for their role during the
Mm,
genocide. And the
wow.
phrase that's kind of become really just meaningful for me is believing that the potential for good is in everyone. Now,
Mm,
you and I talking as followers of Jesus, will say,
mm-hmm,
well, that's the image of God.
mm-hmm,
As
mm-hmm,
I'm
mm-hmm,
out in secular universities, high schools and stuff, we often talk about love. I mean, kids will say, you still believe in God after something like that? And
mm-hmm,
I'll be like, I
mm-hmm,
do. However,
mm-hmm.
God, that 3-letter word, has a lot of baggage with a lot of
Yeah,
people. Let's
yeah,
start with talking about love.
yeah.
And then the potential for love, the
Mm-hmm,
potential for good in every single person. Sometimes you're like, that's impossible. But I would say it's impossible to erase it. It's impossible
mm,
to erase the image of God. It's impossible to erase the potential for good in every person. But of
mm.
course, that's all kind of sounds really good now. I didn't back it, 30 years ago. I was just desperate looking for enemies. It's not like a philosophical, the potential of good is, no, it was like, we got to survive. Who can help us?
Well, and I would imagine in a conflict like that, that there are moments where maybe the same person might commit horrible atrocities,
Oh,
but
yeah.
also be
Yeah.
an agent of incredible good. Um, and it just like when there was that uh, experience that you had, there was a standoff. Was it Gethsemane
Simba
orphanage?
Orphanage. One of the
Yes.
we were bringing food and water to 3 different groups of orphans. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right. We showed up this one day. Actually, we didn't know it was towards the end of the genocide, but deep in
Mm-hmm.
June. It went through the month of
Mm-hmm.
April, May, deep in June,
Mm.
and we showed up. And a couple minutes later, we're surrounded by these militia guys. What were you
Yeah.
thinking about that story?
Well, so I mean, you know, the militia's there. There's Jean. I don't remember his full name, but he's pleading with you not to leave. And
Oh yeah, Jean-Francois, the young brother of the director.
yes, and the police have shown up, which the police were a mixed bag. Sometimes they were helpful, sometimes they were harmful.
Right.
Um, and you're faced with this incredible decision: do I stay? Do I leave?
Hmm.
And then you just like make the choice. You go and you eventually end up at the colonel's headquarters, and then there's this I believe general that was there when you get to the
Actually, the
colonel's head.
prime minister. They
Prime
killed the
minister.
prime minister at the beginning of the genocide, and this
Mm-hmm,
coup that was launched, these extremists who launched the coup put in their own prime minister to
mm-hmm,
to orchestrate, a new government and to
yeah,
orchestrate the genocide. And
yeah,
while the colonel who I had a relationship with was not there that day, his
yeah,
secretary said, well, the prime minister is there. Now,
yeah,
it's interesting, Jim, as you talked about the choice to stay or to leave. I
mm-hmm,
often compare that choice with the original choice that Teresa and I made, that I would stay and she would take the kids to
mm,
safety. And how
mm,
that day, almost 3 months later, 3 months into
mm,
the genocide, that day the choice was even tougher than the choice Teresa and I made at the beginning. I mean, we made the choice at the beginning for me to stay based largely on the fact that there were two people in our home that we were quite certain would be killed. One was a young lady who lived and worked in our home, loved on our kids, had become like family. And so when the embassy said everybody has to leave, nobody can stay, you know, we're like, well, okay. But they also said, you can't bring any Rwandans with you. Well, it was like these people were part of our family.
Right.
And so when we made that decision, it was with the lens of a family. It was like, boy, Rwandans have treated us with so much kindness and privilege. Maybe we can use that privilege to help benefit these two people in our home. And I was making the decision together with Teresa. But when I made the decision at the orphanage, you know, it's kind of interesting. The first one I'm making with Teresa, and I decide to stay. The second one, and the tougher one, because I say tougher because I was making it alone, and it just wasn't clear. The first one seemed really clear. If we leave, these people in our house will be killed. If I stay, there's a chance, maybe, don't know what percentage, but maybe there's a chance they won't be killed. The day of the, you know, being surrounded by the 50 militia guys at the orphanage, I really didn't know which was the right thing to do. And I was making that decision on my own. But at the root of it, I think, is what you're, you know, what theme you've already mentioned here is who's going to be, is the potential for, are you going to find one of your most powerful allies, in this case, in one of the top three guys leading the genocide? And well, I'm not sure where you're going with this theme, Jim. It's an interesting one to me, the potential for good in everyone. Or like you said, the same thing, you know, it's like they could do horrible things. We have a myth that I think we believe almost universally, until we stop and start to unpack it, that there's such a thing as a good guy and a bad guy. You know, we'll come into a movie and we'll be like, okay, wait a minute. Is this a good guy? You know, I come in late and I ask my kids, you know, they're watching something. I'm like, is this a good guy or bad guy? We have that myth. I mean, our brain really likes to simplify things and to protect us, to keep us alive. So our brain really loves that myth, good guy, bad guy. But like you said, no such thing as good guy, bad guy, because we've all done things we're not proud of. And we've also done things, boy, I'm really glad I didn't know what difference that would make, but I'm really glad. So that I think is really important.
And do you feel like,
especially when you're looking at any story, to recognize we can do some incredible kind, or we can do some incredible harm, the same person.
And do you feel like maybe a healthy awareness of our own bad guy allows us to have courage and belief in maybe that there might be some goodness in the really bad guy that could rise to the surface if we come with a sense of humility and we honor their dignity, even when they are doing things that are undignified, that are like almost subhuman, and we want to kind of put them on the level of beast or animal or just totally demonize them. But when we are aware that the same potential lies within us, and then we turn around and we treat them with honor and respect, there might be a chance that they would just step up to the plate.
I definitely believe that if I look for the good, there's a much better chance I'll find it in somebody than if I don't look for it and I don't ask. But I think there's a deeper kind of issue here too, and I'm even wrestling with it right now with my grandsons, 2 and 3. Well, the one's almost 2, and the other one just turned 3. This idea of saying, that's a good boy. You know, you really helped your mom. That's a good boy. And defining our identity by our actions. That, I think, is a really messed up trap that is pretty deeply embedded in all of our thinking. You know, we, on the one hand, we'll say, yeah, you're made in the image of God. But we then find our identity, or we assign identity based on what the person does. And I like one writer, Paul Young, he talks about the truth of our being, who we really are, and the way of our being, how we behave. and how the truth of our being, I know we're getting kind of deep here, but the truth of our being, when it is separate from the way of our being, we're messed up, we're in conflict and stuff. And so we start to define ourselves by what we do instead of being clear on who we are and what our identity is, and that then impacting what we do. So when we screw up, it's like shame comes right in there and starts saying, you're a piece of trash, you know, you're a mess up, you're a failure, you're that. And really, no, I'm not. I did something that was not a good thing and perhaps harmful in that. But guilt can keep me in a healthy. Shame is going to attack my identity and tear me down. So I'm even thinking at the beginning of life with like these little guys, these grandkids, do I use phrases like good boy or, oh, you know, I won't say you're a bad boy because I'm kind of a little more developed than that.
Yeah.
But am I really propagating this idea that we are defined by our actions? And it's like, well, if we're not defined by our actions, then are we not responsible? I don't know. How do you wrestle with that, Jim?
That's a great question. You know, I think, wow. I mean, I had a situation with somebody in my life, where at a young age, there was an interaction with another young person, of what was a somewhat of a sexual acting out. And that individual said to me later, when that happened, I was gay. I said, well, when that happened, that activity was something that sometimes gay people do, but that didn't necessarily define what you were. And that's sensitive to even say right now, because there's so much, I mean, that's such a hot button reality, and there can be so much shame around that in all kinds of different directions. But that's when you talked about this reality of does what we do define who we are? That experience came to my mind. I find myself going like, you know, fundamentally in a world where we want to categorize, and in Rwanda, it was, you know, it was Hutu and Tutsi, and it was a categorization, and I don't even understand all the ramifications of the categorizing there, but it feels like to me, fundamentally, if we believe in a creator, then we're all, you know, children of that creator. And so, you know, I found myself, one question was like, how did that, how do you think those realities between maybe defined by what we do versus defined by who we are, how did you find that? So how did those two realities somehow interplay with maybe the seedbed of what would become a genocide?
I think it's really hard to separate out this idea, because we've grown up much of our lives and we just have it as one kind of thing, one glob, so to speak, or just one concept. We don't stop to try to parse out, wait a minute, what is, you know, who am I really? And then what I do, how does that impact who I am? How does that define, you know, that whole idea of identity? We often don't spend a lot of time with. Yet in Rwanda, the labels and the identity that was given was a matter of life and death for people, you know, and it wasn't based on their behavior. It was based on the constructs that we bring in. I mean, just like race is a construct. That in Rwanda, the ethnicity was really a construct. It was more, you could almost say there was more clan it would be explained more through a clan lens than through an ethnic lens. But I'm not going to get bogged down in that.
Yeah.
But coming back to the question you just asked, the seedbed of genocide and identity and the truth of our being, or the truth of who we really are at the core, and then what we really do, and how they, I mean, that's the definition of integrity. When what I believe and what I do match, that to me is an integrity. And so I would say, Jim, let's try to unpack a little bit of this story and come back to that question of how were people's identities shaped during this time, and how did that shaping of the identities, what are the factors that are shaping their identities? What were the factors that were there? Because I think today in America, we've got some really serious challenges with identity, you know, whether you're talking political identity, whether you're talking religious identity, whether you're talking, you know, sexual identity. We have all these identity polarizing issues. So let's look for a little bit at some of the background with Rwanda in terms of, well, actually, you said the seedbed of genocide. How is it that a neighbor can betray a neighbor and eventually kill them? You know, that's a question that I've wrestled with, and that my Rwandan friends have wrestled with for years. Why did you do it? How could you turn on? You know, we would lend you our cow when your kid was sick, so you had milk to help them have strength and to recover, and you know, basic things. We were bonded together. You know, singing in the choir together, or drinking, you know, our locally made beer together. We were so how could those bonds be torn apart and you actually destroy the other? And for me, I'd like recently to start to look at that conversation with just one aspect of our brain. Okay. And we're all pretty familiar with the amygdala, the fight flight, you know, part of the brain. When you're challenged or threatened, you know, you get this fight, flight, freeze kind of a thing. And then we know the prefrontal cortex, the what I call the good place up here, where you've got logic and empathy and you know, creativity. Now, one guy that I really have learned a lot from, Dan Siegel, he calls it the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. So if we're going to this basic question of how can people turn on their neighbors and actually, you know, grasp, in the Rwanda's case, it wasn't a religious identity, or it wasn't a regional identity, it was an ethnic identity. But how can they grab and latch onto that and actually do genocide? The country had been at war for 3 years already. When we're at war, the big message that was coming across the radio into every home on, you know, multiple times a day, and I can even compare it to cable news network today, playing on the TV screen all day long. But the message that was coming in Rwanda was, we're under attack and there's not enough, scarcity. So those are two things that drive us to our downstairs brain. And you spend 3 years running to your downstairs brain each time you think something, we're under attack. I mean, I can't help but think of it today with social media. The things that gain the most clicks are the things that seem to threaten or drive us to our downstairs brain. And when we're in our downstairs brain, it's not like we're 100% downstairs, 100% upstairs, but when we're primarily in our downstairs brain, we don't really have access to logic, to empathy, to creativity. We're in the survival mode. And so a lot of times people have said, Rwanda, Africa, they don't value life, or they just so different over there, or they're not, you know, human, or they make all kinds of stupid, you know, assumptions and things about it. I mean, you find some of the most compassionate, brilliant, intelligent, creative people in so many ways there. We found we lived in 3 different countries on the continent over 12 years, and we just found people that are just, we learned so much from them and stuff. So once you can get somebody, though, in their downstairs brain, fear, we know that Jesus's words again and again were, "Don't be afraid, don't be." I would hear him saying, "Come out of your downstairs brain, don't be afraid. It's going to be okay. I'm here with you." But the people of the whole country had that message. And when we look through history at the Holocaust, we look at other genocides. Cambodia, a war environment. Yugoslavia, a war around these genocides that have happened. People have been. I'm not trying to say this is the only, but this is a significant part of our thinking, and I would say eventually our ability to be manipulated and forming our identity. So the second night of the genocide, the president's plane is shot down Wednesday evening. The extremists launch a coup, and they do this illegal, seizure of power. And their first item on the agenda is genocide. Thursday, they will kill 10 Belgian UN soldiers. They want to get rid of all the UN, the 2,500 UN soldiers. They want to get rid of them. They want to get rid of all the foreigners. And they're pretty successful with the killing of those 10 Belgian soldiers. The UN makes the decision to withdraw. The embassies, the UN is leaving. We're going to get all of our people out. And that night, Thursday night at our house, the day the UN soldiers were killed, a gang comes to our house, according to our neighbors, with the intent of killing us. And the neighbor ladies come out and they go, no, wait, stop. And I think about this gang, and I don't know why they were targeting us. I mean, there was a lot of propaganda going over the radio, and people knew these Belgian soldiers have been killed. Maybe they thought we were Belgian. I don't know why they were targeting us. But these neighbor ladies come out. And I frame it like this, Jim. I mean, I see them with a lot of courage, but I'm like, they've got to get this gang, at least the leader of the gang, out of his downstairs fight brain into his upstairs empathy, logic brain. Yeah. And they do it by telling stories. And again, I'm flashback, man. Jesus, the whole mission on this planet was, well, the kingdom of God is like this. And he's got a story of a widow, and he's got a story, of a farmer, and he's got a shepherd, all these stories. But this idea of why did people do it? How can you get neighbors to do it? You've got some neighbors like our neighbor ladies who are not joining in. They're courageously going and standing up against genocide, and they're telling stories.
And it was like they were inoculated. Life. It was like they were inoculated to it.
Yeah. I like that. Because I think there are daily habits. The story they told them was that our kids played with their kids. Right. So for 4 years, they were, using your term, being inoculated. We were being bonded together as a community, as family. And so when the hard times came, those bonds were not broken that our children had formed. And I think that deserves a lot of examination itself. Why are we successful at sometimes in breaking the bonds, and why at other times are we not successful in breaking those bonds?
Well, in the storytelling and going back to your book this week, I just found myself saying so there's storytelling, and then there's just genuine human empathy and kindness. Like kindness is an inoculative factor that when we are kind to the people in our circle of influence, especially when they are different from us and when they don't share the same values as us, and when they don't share the same politics as us, when we are genuinely kind to them, even especially if they're at their worst, I think that has potential. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but I think it has potential.
Huge.
So if I could just leap ahead to that part with the general, there was something there, both when you were at the compound, because they weren't attacking, the forces weren't coming in.
For some reason, they just circled the place, and they were waiting. And I didn't know if they were waiting for me to leave or what they were waiting for. And then when I did, for the listeners, that don't know the whole story, when I did decide to leave, I was leaving the orphanage in the hands of a lieutenant and about 6 police officers. They didn't want to spend the night because they said, we're way too outnumbered, but you go get reinforcements. So I had gone with that mission of getting reinforcements, and I end up there at the colonel's office. He's not there, but the bogus prime minister is there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in those two scenarios, and even going all the way back to when your neighbors are saying, well, their children play with our children. There's this thing, this biblical story about Elisha and his servant when the enemy armies are coming, they've surrounded their city, and Elisha prays this prayer and he says, "Oh Lord, open the eyes of my servant." And when the eyes of the servant were opened, he saw like unseen forces surrounding them. Now, some people that may not be their belief system, but sometimes when I listen to your story, and I don't, having met you, I hope not to burst anybody's bubble, but Carl's a pretty just kind of average guy. And I think that what happened was that for whatever reason, this average guy had the opportunity to stand up in a time of duress, and you might be the average guy the next time, or the average lady, and it's not because you're all that special, but maybe there's something about your journey where a divine presence says, I think I could use this person because they have a spirit of kindness, and I think in some ways that, not to over magic it or spiritualize it, but in some sense I think there are certain times when it tips the scale. If there's truly some unseen battle out there, are there times when the scale gets tipped? There's the reality of what you're describing of the human brain, of the the downstairs and the upstairs brain. There's the reality of inoculation through kindness and connection and storytelling. But is there also a tipping of the scale sometimes when we have made ourselves available to our Creator in such a way, if we have to stay, we stay, and we don't even know we have? I don't think you sat down going to Rwanda and said, there's going to be a genocide and I'm going to have it in me to stay.
No. Yeah. Well, okay. So let's look at that, what you just described. When I get there to the colonel's office and the secretary says, no, the colonel's not here, but the prime minister, surprise visit, he's here. They had moved the seat of government out of the capital to another city because it was too intense. The fighting was too intense in the capital. So surprise visit back to the capital. And she says, ask him for help, which just seems like unimaginable to me. And I'm like, this guy's running a genocide. Why would he stop a massacre? And that's another, I have my own theories about why he did, because he will stop it. But the idea that you're talking about, just being present and being available. The students have often asked me, what did you tell the prime minister, that you convinced him, you must have done a real sales job or something. I'm like, no, I didn't actually. I just told him this orphanage, he actually said, I've heard about you and your work. How's your work going? When I met him in the hallway, and I'm like, well, it's going terrible. The orphanage I've been working with is surrounded. They may have all been killed. I just blurted it out. The power of that story is not in some persuasive argument that I made, or that I'm a super, compelling person. I think the power of that story is I was there at the place at the time, and I was available even when I didn't know how we were going to do. I didn't know what, so many times I think we don't want to show up in certain situations because, like, what can I do? There's nothing I can do. I couldn't do anything. But if we just be present, I mean, I remember a tragedy when a family member lost someone very close to suicide. And man, I was just reluctant to call, that family member, but I wanted to call, but I just didn't know what to do. And number one, I underestimated the power of, I love you and I'm here with you. Just saying that. But I think sometimes we think when we don't know what to say or what to do, we absent ourselves. I don't want to look stupid, something like that. And it's like, don't be afraid of looking stupid. Be present, be available. And if we can be present and available, then some amazing stuff that we never would have imagined could happen can happen because we showed up, we were present, and we were vulnerable, kind of to use some of Brené Brown's terms, the power of vulnerability is this willingness to show up.
And from a faith perspective, when you're present, it's not just you that's present.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there's this thing that Paul said. I was thinking about this today as we were preparing for this conversation. 2/3 of the New Testament was written by a guy that we could accuse of genocide.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. Paul was
I mean,
out there, it's sometimes there's nobody more dangerous than a person who thinks they're right,
yeah,
but they're driven by not by love.
yeah.
I'm right, but I'm not driven by love. And Paul was a massive example of that.
And Dr. Luke in Acts describes, still breathing threats and murder. I mean, he's like breathing like violence.
Yeah.
And yet he will turn around when he's had a complete upheaval of his experience, and he'll say, this is the mystery of the gospel, Christ in you, the hope of glory. So if we believe, if it is true that the Creator became a man and he lived and died and rose again and ascended on high and sent his Spirit to indwell the hearts of those who say, yes, I want to follow him, then when we're present, it's not just us that's present. And I just found myself thinking, like, in that moment when those soldiers were standing down, so to speak, when we had no reason to think they might just attack, are they standing down somehow because in the unseen scheme of the battle between good and evil, it's like, no, there's a presence here in this person that's choosing to show up, that's beyond themselves, that they may not even realize the significance of what the indwelling Christ is doing through them at that moment. But is there sometimes those moments where the forces of darkness are held back by people that choose kindness, that choose to tell the story, that choose to give dignity to their enemies, and that just say, I'm available?
You're touching on some things that have been that have changed pretty significantly in my view of God. Before the genocide, I think I was probably, I would say there's arguments for the existence of God to be made because of miracles, things that man cannot explain. It's just got to be a miracle, so there's got to be a God. Miracle God was kind of the thing.
Yeah.
And during the genocide, there was an incredible absence of miracle God. People who loved God, worship God, they're being slaughtered left, right, and center. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? How? And that is, I understand why so many people are like, forget it. There's no God. If there's, all loving and all powerful, and people are being slaughtered who is fathers and stuff, it's like, deliver me from any kind of God. You tell me God's in control. Well, that's a lousy controlling that's going on.
Right.
But when you frame it with love, and you frame it not as controlling, because love doesn't control, love influences. When love starts to control, it starts to be like manipulation. And so when it leaves the world of love. So when you start looking at these situations, instead of saying, where was God? You start asking yourself, where was love? And directly our mind goes to people and their choices and their actions. So when you talk about a presence being there kind of along with the person, it is to me very clear. It's an opportunity and a channel of love. So those neighbor ladies who were standing in front of our house were a channel of love. And crazy enough, even the leader of I don't know if I even want to say that, Jim, but even the leader of the genocide to some degree is going to be a channel of love, even when he doesn't, perhaps that's not his motive. I don't think his motive for stopping the massacre was out of compassion or kindness or love. I think he had other political strings he was trying to pull and manipulations. But laying that aside, when we are there, even though we don't know what to say or what to do, we can be that channel, and then you'll see what to say or what to do or what to be, but you'll never. That's the incredibly powerful thing to me. So it's not like I believe in miracles, but I think, and I know this can sound kind of strange, but stick with me for a minute. I'm going to say that from my understanding, evidence of God is like 95% through the actions of people. not through these miracles that we can't explain through science or anything else. I believe there's those miracles. And maybe it's the exact opposite. And I'm just oblivious to all of those miracles, okay? But for me, what gives me, what takes away a sense of helplessness, and trauma is very much about helplessness, is knowing that there is an influence. And that influence, there's a powerful influence called love. Some people call it God. And I'm one of those people who call it God. But I'm also ready to sit and have a great conversation with somebody who says there's no God. But I do believe in the influence of love. And then when somebody is there and somebody shows up, that influence is the potential is there for incredible things to happen.
Well, and what if the greater miracle? I mean, there's a story that that happens with Jesus, and it has a little texture of some of the roots of bigotry. So there's a Syrophoenician woman, and the disciples are there, and she's pleading with Jesus, please heal my child who's afflicted by demons. And Jesus, reflecting the thought processes of his Jewish disciples, says, well, it's not good to take the bread from the children and feed it to the dogs, implying what the thought process was, that these Syrophoenicians were dogs. Which is not uncommon from our day in the way some groups that get involved in identity politics or get involved in othering might refer to another. And here this woman says, she says, well, yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And it's like, well, who would think to call the casting out of a demon from an afflicted child crumbs? But yet, what if the greater miracle is, as you say, when people, if there is a divine, what if the greater miracle is that the divine would say, more than just casting out of demons in some miraculous way without human engagement and involvement, what if the divine would say, no, actually, I want you with your agency and availability to be that conduit of love, to then show the people that are calling you a dog, I'm going to treat you with dignity.
Yeah, we talk about two birds with one stone, but the ripple effect of when, I feel like everything Jesus was doing had a primary and a secondary and a third, tertiary. There all kinds of continued to expand and like you said, what was the initial thing, the daughter's affliction, could become something so much larger and more impactful.
Well, Carl, at the beginning of this, we thought we may need to take 2 segments. We've hit and bounced around some of the events of the genocide. If you really want to go deep on Carl's experience, check out his book, I'm Not Leaving. There's also some videos online that you can find, documentaries that will give you a chronicle of the events. But we want to come back here, take a little break, and come back and dig into how is that experience kind of blossomed. I don't know if that's the right word, but out of the ashes, beauty is a biblical idea. How has that experience created an opportunity to do a work of renewal and restoration? So that's where we want to go. I'm going to do our little outro music for this segment, if it works. So here, let's see if it goes. There it comes. As we wrap up this segment, I just want to say to you, may you choose to be available and present and kind and loving. And by so doing, prepare if there should ever be a day when you had to stand through the adversity that Carl had to stand through. Hopefully you never will, but may you be kind.